About 3-4 weeks ago, I had a conference call with Guy and Lisa and Bea, our Bea here, and we spent some time discussing what was the purpose of this opportunity. And they basically asked me, they said, we want you to put your corporate hat, and we want you to tackle 2 basic questions. The first one, we want you to discuss what are the big global companies doing about the challenges that they are facing today from a talent development, from a leadership point of view in the current environment. And secondly, we want you to discuss what are the implications for the business schools. So those were the 2 assignments that they gave me for this closing remark. And as I sat down to start preparing that, I realized very quickly a couple of things. First of all, as Bea explained, I've been at IPADE less than 2 years. So pretending that I'm going to speak from an academic point of view was certainly not even an attempt. But then, as I reflected on being out of the corporate world for 2 years, that's an eternity. That's a long period of time, given everything that is happening in the world. Complexity, speed. So I did what I was taught to do a long time ago. If you don't know, go and ask. So I spent the last few weeks asking. I asked companies. I talked to my friends in different countries, Brazil, India, Central America, Mexico, and I basically asked them what's happening out there. So these comments do reflect those type of observations, that homework. I think that's important to identify and put on the table. Let me just put things in context before I jump into the questions that Guy and Lisa asked me to address. 9/11 was it had an impact. The world changed forever. It was a structural change. We only have to go to the airport. We only have to remove our shoes and our belt and our laptops, and that's a reminder every time of what happened on 9/11. I would like to put a premise under this discussion that September 15th of 2008 was exactly the same. September 15 of 2008. That's Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And not because the bankruptcy itself, but that was a symbol of what happened in that financial crisis, September 15, 2008. It had an impact on the global markets. It changed the world forever. It was a structural change. And my premise is that it had an impact from a labor market perspective. The labor market changed forever. Just the difference with 9/11, on 9/11 we noticed that the next day. The next day, the borders shut down. The next day, planes stopped flying, so we noticed the impact of 9/11. September 15, 2008, at what it means, the whole financial crisis, the global financial crisis, it has had an impact on the local labor markets, on the global labor markets that has been evolving over the last 2-3 years. And that's the premise that I would like to put on the table and work out of that idea. So let me go back to the very first question that Guy and Bea and Lisa asked me to address, which is, what are the global companies doing today? In light of this context, in light of this challenge, to go and address the labor market. And let me put it in non-academic terms. Let me put it in non-academic terms. The first thing that they've done has to do with productivity. I talked to these companies, I talked to my friends, I added, subtracted, multiplied, divided, and I identified, ¿cómo estás, Julio? Bien? I identified 3 very important aspects. Productivity, number 1. It's been brutal. Big corporations are productivity animals, and they have behaved exactly that way. Productivity animals. I spoke to Microsoft, and Microsoft laid off thousands of people all over the world, First time ever. And Microsoft is a rich company. You just have to look at the balance sheet. That's a very rich company. They, however, in light of this context, reacted, and the first thing they did was lay off thousands of people all over the world for the first time ever. McKinsey has a fantastic chart. I don't know if you've seen it, quarterly review. And it shows about 7 or 8 curves. They all have the same shape. It's a U curve. They show the recessions back to the 70s. Each curve is a recession. Each curve starts when the recession starts to go down as unemployment goes down because of the recession, and then starts to go up as the economy recovers, and finishes exactly at the point where it started when the recession starts. So you see U curves, 6, 7 U curves out of this chart. When you look at 08, 09 chart out of this McKinsey report, it starts to go down very quickly, 3 times deeper than any recession that you see on those charts. And it has stayed there, and I checked yesterday, and it's still down there. It's not going back. And I think that's a structural change. That's a great example of, this is the US market, that's a great example of a structural change in the market. It stays there, and it will probably be there forever. That change the dynamics of the global market. Companies are trying to make out of the good old payroll cost line, they are trying to make it variable as opposed to fixed. They are trying to get into the temporary workforce, and that's a way to make payroll a variable cost as opposed to a fixed cost, another structural change. So I think that the big companies move into the productivity area very quickly. Microsoft changed the definition of productivity for them. Microsoft used to call productivity, as many other companies, used to say productivity means doing more with less. That's what productivity means. Well, Microsoft changed the definition as a result of this crisis. Microsoft now says productivity is doing it better with less, doing it the right way with less resources. That's the definition of productivity for Microsoft. Microsoft told me we cut fat as a result of this crisis. It was a great opportunity, and we realized that we had fat, so we cut it. And now Microsoft has this mandatory 5% annual attrition rate. Every year, out of the 100 people that they evaluate, 5% have to go out as a result of this opportunity of this crisis. So the structural labor market change, it was a structural change. And I think that's a great example. By the way, GE, I worked for GE many years. GE used to do that. It was 10%. 10% mandatory annual attrition rate. I think that's a great example of a change in the labor market. It's less people demanding better results, innovative ways of doing things, and more competitive on each position, on each job position. That's a perfect example of a structural change in the labor market. So observation number 1 coming out of the big global corporations, productivity. They are productivity animals that has changed the rules of the game. Second observation, while this was taking place, this cost game was taking place, they have to grow. I mean, I'll spend a lot of time reducing costs, that's okay, but I have to grow. And that's what they've been doing. And what they did immediately, they turned to the emerging markets. It doesn't matter which magazine you read, it doesn't matter which annual report you take a look at, they all talk about emerging markets. And it shouldn't be a surprise. If you look at the IMF forecast for 2014, emerging markets will be growing 7% plus GDP years versus year, 2014, 7% emerging markets, 2% the developed world. 7% emerging markets, 2% GDP growth in the advanced economies. This is by 2014. That's coming out of the emerging markets, which I think that's very important. Depending on the definition, the one that I look at, today in the world, 20% is middle class. 20% is middle class. By 2020, 40% of the world will be middle class. 40%. Just imagine the amount of opportunity growth-wise that exists, and that's all driven, by the way, by emerging markets. And this decade, for the first time ever, for the first time, not ever, for the first time in the last 200 years, and I guess it's 200 years because there's no information after 200 years, but for the first time in 200 years, the contribution to the global growth coming out of the emerging markets will be more important than the contribution coming from the advanced world. So the power of the emerging markets growth is there. It's fantastic. But there's a problem. There's a huge problem. There's not enough people. There's a huge talent scarcity in the emerging markets. There's a huge talent scarcity within emerging markets. I had a great meeting with the people from Hedrick and Struggle, the search firm. They just released a study called Global Talent Index, and I had a meeting with them in preparation for this meeting. Conclusion: talent wars are going to take place because of the scarcity of talent within emerging markets. I look at a study, this Hedrick and Struggle study, they did that with the Economist Intelligence Unit. Russia, out of the people that are coming out of universities in Russia, only 15%, only 15% are employable by the large corporations. Only 20% out of the people coming out of schools in India are employable by the big multinational corporations. I got those two numbers, 15% Russia, 20% India. I am 100% sure that that does reflect what's happening in the emerging markets. And pick a range, 10 to 20%. 10 to 20% of the people coming out of universities in emerging markets, and by the way, I don't have to remind you that the people that get access to universities in our emerging markets are the elite. 10 to 20% are employable by the big corporations. So there's a huge challenge. GE in Brazil, GE was not present in Brazil 2004. It had a presence, but it was not an aggressive presence. And because of everything that's happening there, and President Lula and the connection Brazil-China, GE has got into Brazil big time. And what the company is doing to address the talent limitations, they are moving Europeans, people from Portugal, people from Spain, people from Italy to Brazil to address their talent, the huge talent needs. The cost of the local Brazilians compared to similar people in New York or Europe is significantly higher. Just imagine the implications for the company. They are huge, huge implications. And to prepare for that, GE finalized a contract, I don't know if with one or several universities, but has secured 100 students that they haven't even finished university, and they already have a job with GE, in order to move one step forward in terms of this fight for the talent that is coming out of school. So there's a huge imbalance in the emerging markets between the opportunity, between the talent availability in terms of numbers, the talent quality in terms of the numbers, and the cost. There's a huge imbalance. So there's going to be fights for the best between companies and, frankly, even countries. And I think, just to close this second point, I think that one element that becomes very important is mobility. Mobility in the world is unavoidable. Mobility is unavoidable. People will have to feel comfortable, because that's going to be one way to address some of these talent scarcity, talent needs. So what are global companies doing? Number one, productivity, big time. Number two, all of them looking into this fantastic opportunity behind emerging markets, but there's a huge issue with talent. And the number three that I identified in these discussions with these companies and some reports that I read is corporations, what they are doing is they are reinventing work. They are reinventing work. And they are having to reinvent work because of the context that they are living, because of these challenges that they are facing. And I think that's very important to evaluate. They are trying to expand the pool of talent that they have access to, and they are trying to find all kinds of ways to expand the pool of talent. As I said, they are moving people from other countries. That's one way to expand the pool of talent when they see limitations in their own locations, in their own countries. So they are moving people around. That's one way to do it. They are getting into this part-time concept, which has big implications as well. Part-time workers, that's another way to expand the pool of talent that is available. They are looking into older workers. And by older workers, I mean retired, semi-retired. That's another way to have access to the pool of talent. And I think another one, which I think is very important and has big implications, I think is great, is access to the woman talent. I think they are looking into the opportunities. They are trying to figure out how they reinvent work so the women can continue their careers. Those women that left for obvious reasons, for natural reasons, and they are trying to come back. The big corporations are trying to figure out how they address that. I think that's why this idea of the center that the IPADE has here, the Centro para la Mujer, that the center that is trying to understand how to help women continue to move into the ladder of corporations. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a one step forward into the right direction. So big corporations are looking into this type of challenges. The big corporation discovered that 30% of the work that gets done within corporations could be done virtually. 30% could be done virtually. So I think that's another way that how they are trying to reinvent the corporate work. They are trying to leverage the tools that are there, digital tools, Web 2.0, this concept of the global business networks, top coders, software development, this community of 250,000 software developers that are available for companies, innovative technology developers, 250,000 technologies that are available for corporations. Corporations are tapping into that. So they are reinventing what the concept of work means. They have to be more flexible. They have to worry about how they keep and retain the people. So three things from a corporation point of view. Number one, productivity, brutal. Number two, the fact that they are looking into emerging markets, talent is scarce. And number three, they are having to reinvent what work means within the corporations. So that's the first part, Guy, that's the first part. Lisa, that's the first part of what global companies are doing. Now, they said, well, now what does it mean for the business schools? And as I sat down and reflected on that, I said, you know what, that's too big of a jump. To me, too big of a jump to think about global companies, what does it mean for business schools? There was one element that was missing, and then I realized, you know what, I would like to know what the talent that is coming out of the business schools are thinking, so that I can then be able to answer the question that you had. I would like to understand what the talent is coming out of the business schools, what are the dreams, what are the desires. And I did my little survey. I sent an email to the 15 MBA graduates that are here. Thanks a lot, Maite. And I asked them, what do you want to do? What do you expect from your future job? What do you expect from your own future companies? And they replied, and then I compared the answers with the great study that the BCG, Boston Consulting Group, did with the World Economic Forum on the same topic. And I compare, and let me just read you four specific bullets on what the IPADE MBA graduates answer, and then I'll compare that with BCG WEF, and I thought it was very similar, interestingly enough. Our MBA graduates from IPADE said, what I expect from corporations in the future, or companies, I don't usually corporations, but companies, I want a learning environment. I want a job that fits my lifestyle. And I even wrote down a quote because I thought it was very interesting. Somebody, out of this answer, somebody said, work is something you do, not a place you go to. Work is something you do, not a place you go to. And that quote, and I'm just reading it because I think that quote for a big corporation has huge implications, huge implications. Work is something you do, not a place you go to. Number three, that the IPADE MBA participants share with me, sensitivity to planet challenges. And number four, people-based culture. And had also other comments, but I identified those 4 that were very uniform across the answers that I got. And then I compared with the BCG World Economic Forum answers, very similar. I just would like to read 3 that I got out of this, that study: inspiring work environment, high freedom of mind, virtual mobility. Inspiring work environment, high freedom of mind, virtual mobility. And as I compared those 2, I was saying to myself, what happened to the good old days? What happened to the good old days where MBA students like myself were thinking about, why are you there? What are you expecting? I want money. I want a title. I want a long-term career. I want promotion. That's what I want. I said, and I was saying to myself, whatever happened to the good old days? And then when I compared those, I said, it is not a surprise, it shouldn't be a surprise that the big corporations are having to change and reinvent what work means when you read these statements. So with that, global companies, what they want, talent, what are the dreams and the desires, then I moved to, okay, what does it mean for business schools? And I look at some information. I look at Dr. David Garvin's book, Rethinking the MBA. I took a look at the curriculum, and I couldn't reach a specific conclusion, to be honest. I found a lot of similarities. One way or another, they were all saying ethics, values, integrity is crucial. They were all saying we have to train the future leaders with different words at the end. They all were saying critical thinking is very important. Some of them emphasize entrepreneurship more than others. So rather than just repeating what I read, and I'm sure the last couple of days, there's been a lot of great ideas on what it means for the business school. Let me just, in the spirit of, and unfortunately I couldn't introduce myself with our friend from Johnson & Johnson. I don't know if he's still here or he already left. But last night he said there should be a follow-up to this event. And he said by Thursday, you should all go back and read your 5 items as a follow-up to this particular event. So in the spirit of that concept, let me just precisely follow that advice. And rather than saying and repeating what you've heard the last couple of days, let me put 3 questions for the business schools that I think are very important to follow up and add to the list of our friend from Johnson & Johnson. The first question that I think is important for the business schools is, I think that we should look at how the program, how the resources, how the emphasis was placed around the business school on September 14, 2008, meaning prior to the crisis. And we should compare exactly the same items today, exactly the same items. And we should ask ourselves a question. If nothing changed, if it looks exactly the same, we're missing a boat, big time. We're missing a boat. Big corporations are changing. Our talent, they have dreams, they have desires. So I think we should evaluate ourselves and say, what are we doing in light of this significant structural forever change that took place in the labor market? If there are differences, I think we should give ourselves a pat in the back. I think it's great. If we are changing some things, I think it's fantastic. We should give a pat in the back. I don't know why in the academic world we don't give ourselves pat on the back more often. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a cultural thing. I don't know. But we should. We should. But then we should also think about the fact that it is great that we are changing something. I guarantee to you that it's not enough. I promise to you, I'm willing to bet that it's not enough. If you are changing things pre and post crisis, fantastic, great, good for you, it is not enough. So that's one question that I think we should reflect as business schools. The second question that we should reflect on has to do with how are we connecting corporations with the talent that is coming out? What kind of bridge are we building? Is it a bridge where we're trying to make it easier to go through? Is it a bridge that we understand what corporations need and we're trying to build the pillars where the bridge is standing or not? I think we should also ask that particular question. What kind of bridge to connect those two very important reasons for being for the business schools are? And I think that's the second question that we should ask ourselves. And then the third question, where I think we should do some homework, is about the future. It's about the future. Where would we like our business schools to be in 5 years, in 10 years? I think that's the third question. I think it's a very important question. I would like to emphasize that the world is changing very fast, and as the IBM survey that they launched not too long ago concluded, as complex as it has ever been, and it will be even more complex. IBM said in this study, they interviewed 1,500, if you just jump into the IBM page and you have access to it. They interviewed 1,500 CEOs from all over the world, CEOs of the largest companies, 1,500. And number one conclusion was, out of these 1,500 CEOs was, I am not capable, 50% of them said, I'm not capable to cope with the complexity of the world. 50%. And so I think that we should ask, as business schools, what's the future? If we are moving into that direction, if we're following a map, a roadmap that says, this is where I would like to be in 5, 10 years, same thing. Good for you, that's fantastic. We should give a pat on the back, but I guarantee to you that is not fast enough. That is not fast enough. The world is moving way, way too fast. So let me just end here with some final points on closing remarks. Number one has to do with what I just described. The context, the world changed forever. Big corporations are reinventing what work means. Talent have dreams and desires that are different from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think business schools have to build that bridge to make that connection. I think that's the bottom line message that I would like to convey. The second point on these just final remarks, the second point, some of you may be thinking, big corporations are not my constituency. Big corporations are not my stakeholders. Where I come from is not about big corporations. Where I come, it is about entrepreneurs. Where I come from, it is about small and mid-sized companies, and I think you're absolutely right. That's probably your labor market, because where you come from. But just like what we did with the big corporations, I think you should be able to say, these are the three elements, these are the three actions, these are the three concepts where these entrepreneurs, these small, mid-sized companies are working on right now, so that I can do something about it. You should identify those three, because I think that's very crucial. And same thing with talent. I read to you what the responses from our MBA participants were. That may be different from where you're coming from. From where you're coming from, maybe different desires, different expectations, which is okay. That's respectable. But you should know them very well. So that when you are building that bridge, you should be able to connect, to make that connection. I think that's very important. So I think that's the second message that I would like to leave on. And then finally, the third message has to do with the title of this event, of this conference. The title, you have it there. It says, Generating Leadership, Developing Human Capacity in Emerging Markets. Generating Leadership, Developing Human Capacity in Emerging Markets. Now, I have to confess that I wrote down in a piece of paper and I put it on my wall in my office. If you go to my office, you will see the name of the conference. So every time I sat down to put some ideas, I look at that and I had mixed feelings. And I had mixed feelings. On one side, I felt overwhelmed by what it says there. I felt overwhelmed by the fact that we are trying to generate leaders. We are trying to develop human capacity, but more importantly, in emerging markets. And the name of the game in emerging markets is scale. We can generate one leader. We can develop 100 great people with the capabilities that we deem they should have. But in the emerging markets, if there's no scale behind that, we are not playing the game. In emerging markets, scale is the name of the game. So when I look at that and with that concept of scale, I felt overwhelmed about the immensity of whoever decided that was the title of this conference put there. But then on the other side, the other 50%, I thought, what a fantastic opportunity. What a beautiful challenge that we are putting ourselves on the shoulders to say, every day where I go to the office, where I'm standing in the classroom, I'm trying to build the scale in emerging markets that are needed to have that leadership and develop that human capacity. And I think that should make us very, very proud and also very committed to our task. So with that, Guy,